A man reaps what he sows. In 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 6, it says, "But this I say, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully." A man reaps what he sows. And in this, it's such a simple thing, but I think we miss it. It's such a simple concept, but we miss it all the time. And I think what we miss is that the path is made by walking it. The path is made, but it takes you to walk it. What you put in, scratch it. The outcome is never consistent, but mostly this: you can never take out what you don't put in. You can never expect there to be a harvest if you have never sown any crops. Many of us are losing our harvest season, losing the time where we should be reaping the rewards, because we haven't sown in any work. We haven't sown in the seed. We haven't taken the path. In this, is also more to say. We have to realize that sowing is not just required, but it's good. Like, not just it's required to sow in to take something out, right? Not that it's just required to do so, like a required act. Yes. But it's also good. I think sometimes we get lost on, and I don't just mean that it's good for you or that it can result into something being good as a result, right? But more so that just the act of sowing, the act of being willing to say, you know what, I'm going to plant this seed. I don't know what the return is going to be. I don't know what the growth is going to be, but I'm willing to not be idle. I'm willing to act. I'm willing to realize that all of my labor has profit, but idle chatter leads only to poverty. I'm willing to be useful. I'm willing to no longer just expect something to happen, but that I'm willing to work so that it can. He who sows sparingly also reaps sparingly, but he who sows abundantly, or rather bountifully, just means abundantly, but he who's willing to sow in more reaps more. He who sows little reaps little. He who sows much reaps much. It's a simple concept, but we miss it. It's being willing to sow. The act of sowing, the law of action, being willing to take action, being willing to act. How can we have a byproduct if we never input anything? And this is not even just state things outside of ourselves, but the sowing can happen internally too. And I honestly think that the sowing must happen internally before we ever have any external outcomes. Though understanding that the outcome is never consistent, sure, why not? That's fine, right? You can't control it, just as a farmer can't control. He can control how many seeds he puts in the ground. He or she can control how many seeds they put into the ground, but they can't control what their return is going to be. But they do understand that the more seeds they put in, the more the return will be. So should you. You should realize that the more and more you're willing to do, the more and more you're willing to sow. Sow into yourself, sow into these projects, sow into your passion, whatever it is, right? Sow into the desire. The more you can get out of it. But I feel like that's to say that the sowing must happen internally first. Because if the sowing doesn't happen in, how can you ever expect to receive outward? It's more to say this. Many of us have a great vision for ourselves. Many of us have a great idea of what our life should be. But we've never sown that external vision of what it could be, right? Even though we are seeing it internally, we never sow that internally. Meaning we see it, but we don't necessarily believe it for ourselves. Because if you did believe it, if you believe that an apple tree is possible, it's possible for you to grow an apple tree, you'll just simply plant the apple seed. If you haven't been planting your seeds. See, I truly believe that faith without works is dead. You can have the faith in believing that an apple tree can grow somewhere around here where you'll be able to harvest apples. And maybe that happens. Maybe. Or you can take the apple seed and go outside and plant the tree. I think that's more to say, stop wishing upon a star. Stop wishing upon a star when you can become what you're hoping for. The sowing must happen internally before you can ever reap externally. The harvest is just a byproduct of being willing to sow in the seed. So. I think we overthink the process. I think that's ironic that I said I think, but in that, I was just having a conversation with a friend. I just had Bible study before I had a conversation with a friend, and I had a men's group before that. And one of the things that I've been working on is just being more useful to the people that are around me, to be a resource for others, as much as I'm being a resource to myself. And I think a lot of times we're a resource for ourselves, but we don't make ourselves useful to ourselves. Yeah. And I think once we allow ourselves to realize that we're useful and we can use our own self as a helping hand, we realize that the wishing and the hoping and the waiting was just our own form of participating in our undoing, of thinking that we needed something outside of ourselves to save ourselves. It's almost just being willing to shift the responsibility, hoping that it took something else instead of it taking you, wanting it to not be all in your hands. And it's not, truly is not, right? But what isn't in your hands shouldn't be on your mind in the first place. But what should be, should be. And that's to say, don't have idle hands either. That's to say, plant the seed. Sow it. Like, I dare you to sow it. Right? You see how I had to switch it up from philosophy to getting real? I dare you to sow the seed, though. Like, I dare you to step into everything that God has for you. Like, I just dare you. I don't think, a lot of times my friends, they'll say, I want to do this. And I just say, I dare you. I dare you for a second to just want to be great. Like, not just to want to, but actually go be it. Like, I dare you to step into everything that you're meant to be now. Like, I dare you that instead of wishing for this to happen, that you just become it now. That you live in the now fully where your feet are, and stop living in your own analysis of life, because that's not allowing you to experience where you are. And because you're so caught up in your mind, and this is what's keeping you from being where your feet are, you're living your own thoughts. But you're not taking any steps. I dare you. Sow the seed. See what happens if you're just willing. And I was having this conversation with my sister, Like, she sowed the seed. She was so unwilling to sow the seed. I pushed her. She sowed the seed. Took another year. She sowed the seed though. Took another year for her to actually, because sowing the seed is just the first step, y'all. You can't just sow the seed and then, okay, you got to nourish it too. So it took her about a year to start nourishing it. And now it's starting to sprout in its own regard to its respective place, right? It's starting to sprout. But in its sprouting, she got afraid of how big it can get. And I think a lot of us sometimes can just be afraid of our own success. That we can be afraid of not even knowing how to handle if we do get everything that we're praying for. That if the universe actually did provide everything that we're asking for, do I even have the capacity for it? Like, there's a verse in 1 Chronicles chapter 14 and 10. And Jabez is praying to God, and he prays not only that God blesses him, but that he enlarges his territory, and that God's hand will always be with him, and that he keeps him from evil and allows him not to form any pain or harm to others. And it says in the end of that God grants Jabez's request. And the power in that, though, is understanding that he's not just praying for the blessing, but he's also praying for the capacity, the enlarging the camp, the praying for the capacity to be able to handle the growth, to be able to handle the blessing, to be able to steward it well. See, I think a lot of times we're praying for so much, or we're asking for so much. And it's not the asking that's the problem. It's you don't have room enough for it. Like, you don't have enough room for what you're asking for. And it's not because you can't have it, it's because you haven't made room. And sometimes that room looks like giving yourself enough mental capacity, enough mental space to be willing to sow the seed internally before we ever expect anything externally. Because it doesn't matter how much blessings you get on the outside if you can never appreciate it in the inside. I said it before and I'll say it again. That the affirmation, or the path, never needs affirmation. It's always the self. So you can be blessed. You can be in the greatest rooms. Your gift can put you in great rooms that your heart posture can't keep you in, that your mindset can't keep you in. Therefore, that wasn't a blessing, because a blessing too soon isn't a blessing at all. How quickly our blessings can turn into burdens when our heart isn't in the right place, or when we don't even have the capacity to maintain it. That's like asking God to pour into your cup and then it begins to overflow, and still ask God for more and more and more. It's overflowing. You don't have the capacity for more. So if anything else, don't just ask for the capacity. Yes, the capacity, ask for more, right? But create it. I think many times we're asking for things that we can give to ourselves, that we're meant to give to ourselves. Like, yes, I believe that there's some things that only God can give you, and there's some places that only God can take you. True. But I think there's so much more that he's left in our hands. So it should be on our mind. And the things that are not in our hands, then they shouldn't be on our mind. It's that simple, but we make life more complicated than it is. And I'm saying this from a place of getting on the other side of it. Now I realized how difficult I was making my own life because I was participating in the undoing of myself. Because I thought that I needed more than what I had, but I never even had the capacity to handle the more than I was wishing. It's funny that I say this because earlier this morning, I was like, I saw somebody else making this amount of content or whatever, and I was like, man, I could easily make that, and I could get more clients, and I could grow my stuff. And I was like, man, I could really make like 20 grand a month. And I'm just being really honest with y'all, right? Transparent. I'm like, I could really make like 20 grand a month. if I wanted to. Then the question there was, I had two questions. What stops you? Like, what's stopping you from actually being or having what you want? It's you. So it's asking yourself, what do you really want? And then what are you willing to do to get it? That's the first question. Then the second question was, if I went out and got it, would I have the capacity to be able to steward it wisely? Would I have the capacity to be able to handle it? If I went and got what I said that I know that I could get, would I have the capacity to be able to maintain it? Then the real answer was no. I had to be honest with myself. The real answer is I don't even have the capacity to do it. Like, if I got everything that I was asking for, or that I knew that I could go get, I wouldn't have the capacity to even be able to maintain it. Then here's the bigger thing, right? Here's the spiritual thing. Asking myself, is this for me or for the mission? Is it for me? Is this something that pleases me? Do I get the glory from this? Or is it something that glorifies God and is on par, in alignment with the mission that he brought me? Because if it's not, then it's just distracting me from the mission. And anything that you gain that God's hand isn't in is no longer a game, but a gamble. Because whatever his hand isn't in, he's not sustaining, meaning you have to sustain it. And we all know how weak we are. So imagine if you have to sustain something, it's going to wear you down. Not only do I not have the capacity for it, but if I went and got it, I wouldn't even have God's favor with it. And I could do more damage by seeking to get that, focusing on me rather than the mission. That is where the love of money becomes the root of all evil. So I even had to check my heart posture. I don't feel like I was moving in the wrong direction, but I'm asking myself the deep questions. And this is where I feel like you have to ask yourself the deep questions and start planting and sowing the seeds in yourself. That I knew that I could go get it if I wanted it, but I'm choosing not to because I knew it would just distract me from the mission that God has placed me on. And even in so, I would be doing a disservice to everybody, including myself, because I wouldn't be able to, not only would I not have the capacity, but I wouldn't be able to steward every opportunity wisely. And we also have to make sure that we understand this, that God isn't the only one who can open doors. Lucifer can too. The enemy can too. So if I understand that if I'm opening doors that God never told me to open, if I'm going places that God never told me to go, who do I expect on the other side of the door? But it brings me back to what I'm saying here. It brings me back to the point at hand, which is sow. But know why you're sowing too. I think many times that's the big thing. Know what are you seeking from once you get the harvest? Fully expecting that your sowing is going to have some reaping and there's going to be a harvest to come soon after. What do you expect the harvest to be? And why do you want it in the first place? So don't just sow for the sake of sowing, but sow intentionally, so that you have a harvest and that you're getting exactly what you know is meant for you. But I appreciate you if you made it to the end of this video. And I pray that it just speaks to you in the way that it's meant to, the way that it speaks to me. And I've been sharing this message all night, and it just makes so much sense for the night to close with me sharing this with you as well. So I pray it does speak to you and speak to everybody who needs to hear it. I appreciate the growth that we're having. Though gradual or not, right? It doesn't matter because I'm sowing the seed. Sow the seed. Once you sow the seed, don't worry about, don't question if it's growing. Have faith that it is. And that before it ever grows up, it has to grow out. And I'm seeing that in the things that I'm sowing into. First being myself, because I have to sow internally before I ever expect a reward externally. Then into things like this, into other expressions, and also into people and stuff like that. So it's been really rewarding to just be willing to sow, because it was a while before I was actually willing to. So now to be on the other side of it. So I encourage everybody here to just be willing to sow, because he who sows sparingly reaps sparingly, but he who sows bountifully reaps bountifully. So if you didn't sow today, well, I'll see you tomorrow. Peace.